these 2 days, this Tuesday and Thursday today, are the only time that we're going to be addressing directly the assassination of President Kennedy. And so I just wanted to get it all done in a couple days. And so, but I didn't want to have to bore you with that, watching the video. So I do want to direct your attention to 3 specific books if you want to get more detailed information about this. One of them is Jim Douglas's book. There's a couple readings that are in the reading list from him. Jim Douglas's book called JFK and the Unspeakable, which gives you lots of details. David Talbot's book, The Devil's Chessboard, is an excellent book. And Peter Dale Scott's book called Deep Politics and the Death of JFK. Okay, and what we'll do is I will for just this week, we'll put up the last 2 lectures in the JFK Alternative Theories of the Assassination course, so that you can see them if you'd like, but we're not going to post those on the general YouTube place where you can see the course, each lecture in the course that we've had, in case any of you are using that to kind of review any of your notes or anything. So what we want to do is I want to finish today going over some of the details of the actual assassination itself, because next week in week 9 I want to discuss the aftermath of the assassination that points more and more toward the general explanation of the assassination that you get in the 3 books that I just referenced and that we've been explicating here in the course. And we're going to be discussing things next week which have to do with the Watergate burglary, the return of the impeachment resolution by the House Judiciary Committee against Richard Nixon flowing out of the Watergate burglary, what the connection between the Watergate burglary was and the Kennedy assassination, and the installation of the Church Committee, the House Select Committee, or the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence Abuse, chaired by Senator Frank Church, and followed by the House Select Committee on Assassinations, and the Iran-Contra Select Committee, all of which had these major select committees appointed in Congress because of this kind of sequence of scandals that besieged the United States during that period of time, which all arose out of this issue that we're talking about in this course, and that there was this very aggressive effort on the part of the national security state bureaucracy and this cabal that I've been talking about to suppress any type of full-scale revelation about what it is that was going on behind the scenes in all of those scandals, because it's all basically the same thing. Then in week 10, what I want to do is I want to return to the historical origins of this cabal to try to make clear that it wasn't just this narrow period of time that we've been talking about that went from just before World War I down to the end of World War II and the assassination of President Kennedy, during which this cabal has been functioning, so that you won't, I don't want you to leave this course being depressed about the fact that there's some sort of cabal that is in charge of the United States now during your lifetime that hasn't been going on the whole time. I'm not sure whether that's more depressing or less depressing, but I want to then be able to address what it is I think we can do about it. So what I want to do today is I want to point out kind of a dozen or so key facts that makes it clear that the Warren Commission findings about the Kennedy assassination are totally unreliable. And then secondly, I want to point out a half dozen key facts that I believe point directly toward the larger explanation of the assassination that we're talking about in this class. And then I want to discuss this entire issue of the Kennedy assassination in the context of the general themes that we're addressing in the course, that being that there is this element, this elite element behind the scenes in the United States that basically dictates the foreign policy and the domestic policy of the United States. Okay, so the first point that I want to make on this, rather than taking you through the entire 2 hours of those last lectures in kind of potentially smothering some of the key points in this kind of detailed chronology, though, as I say, it'll be available for you so you can have the whole organic chronology of what was going on. But I want to point out, number one, when I reflect back upon everything that I know about this and have come to know over the years, one of the very first things that leaps to mind is that this. Do we have this little machine right here? We just see this. Is that it? Right here. I guess it's not very clear, but the bottom line is there's no way that this man right here and this other man right here, this is William Rip Robertson. And this is Grayson Lynch, his sidekick. And you can see the front of the Kennedy limousine just coming into view here. And these two men are standing directly next to the famous Stennis freeway sign, behind which the limousine went to block out for a moment the first shot that hit the president from the Zapruder film. The famous scene where when the president comes out from behind the Stennis freeway sign where he's holding his throat like this, that you may have seen 100 times. This is 1.2 seconds before that. And this is William Rip Robertson tipping his hat to the president coming by. And there's no possible way that William Rip Robertson could be just standing in Dealey Plaza at 12:30 p.m. on the 22nd of November and not have been directly involved in whatever assassination might take place there at that time and place, because that was his job. He was, in fact, the field commander of the S-Force that we've talked about, that was put together back in 1960 at the request of Richard Nixon to assassinate Fidel Castro and Raul Castro, Che Guevara, and the other 5 commandantes of the new revolutionary government in Cuba. So there's no way that Rip Robertson would just coincidentally happen to be there at that particular place and a full 10-mile long parade route coming from Love Field, going to the location where the president was supposed to be delivering his noontime luncheon speech. To have this particular guy, who is the same guy who was standing immediately next to William D. Pauley on the night of June 19th of 1963, just 5 months earlier, on the deck of the Flying Tiger, when William Pauley, standing immediately next to him, told John Martino that not to worry, that they were going to kill the president. We're going to kill President Kennedy, referring to him as the MF at that time. So the reason why it just couldn't be coincidental is because of the direct testimony that I have now of Dick Billings having stood there and heard him say it, and I've now recently gotten him tape recorded confirming the fact that this was said immediately in his presence, and how terrible he feels about that having happened, and he did not do whatever it was that was necessary to keep that event from happening. So this is the first number one piece of evidence here as to why this could not have happened without Rip Robertson having been directly involved in the assassination. Secondly, there's no way that this particular individual here, there's no way that that particular individual, who is Edward Lansdale, could possibly have been in Dealey Plaza. At the same time that William Rip Robertson was there, this is approximately 5 minutes after the shooting itself. And there are these 3 hobos that have been taken out of a boxcar immediately behind the grassy knoll. And they've been taken out of the boxcar, and they're being paraded from the boxcar to the Dallas police station right here by, you see the policeman here. And the fact that this particular policeman here that you see in the front is shown to have in his ear, in his right ear, an electronic telephone communication system that none of the Dallas police had. And this is a close-up picture, an expanded picture of Lansdale right here. And these are the photographs that his wife positively identified as being Lansdale. And Fletcher Prouty, who worked with him in the Joint Special Operations Command, identified him. And they all said if you could only blow these pictures up enough to see whether or not he has on his left hand this major ring that he used to wear all the time, right here. And that he has a very well-known what they call drooping right shoulder from an injury that he had suffered. And you'll see that right here. You see well, you can't see it as clear, but his right shoulder sags off to one side. You can see it a little better here. This is he right here. You can always see that his right shoulder always hangs down lower than his left shoulder. And his wife talked about that, and Fletcher Prouty talked about that, and the others who identified him in that picture. And they positively identified him in the picture before they knew exactly where it came from. But there's no way that Edward Lansdale could have been just coincidentally at Dealey Plaza, the same place where Rip Robertson was at 12:35 p.m. on November 22nd of 1963, without him having been involved in what it was that was happening there. And you remember that Lansdale was the fellow who actually found the $1.2 trillion in gold and platinum and silver in jewels that was brought to talk with Douglas MacArthur back in 1945, and they set up the Anderson Trust. And that he was a major person involved in the Anderson Trust, and he was in charge of the covert operations against the Cuban government in the CIA. And so that, and thirdly, there's no way that Santos Trafficante, who is the man who had set up that S-Force of the 15 anti-Castro Miami-based Cuban exiles, there's no way that Santos Trafficante would have told our office through Andy Tooney, who's our chief investigator, there's no way that Santos Trafficante would have told us, F. Lee Bailey's office, as Santos Trafficante's attorneys, there's no way that he would have confidentially told us that it was in fact the S-Force that had assassinated President Kennedy. That he told us this in May of 1973, before anyone had made such an accusation. And he told us this confidentially in the context of trying to explain why 3 of his former gunmen from Havana were in the Watergate Hotel, in burglarizing the Watergate Hotel, because F. Lee Bailey had been retained to represent James McCord, the former CIA wiretapping specialist, who had been arrested with Martinez and Gonzalez and Bernard Barker, the 3 anti-Castro Cuban exiles who were all Trafficante gunmen from Havana before 1959. And so that when Bailey made the inquiry of Trafficante why these guys were in the Watergate Hotel, he told us in May of 1973 that this was because the S-Force had been the ones who assassinated President Kennedy, and that Nixon, when he was running for the re-election in 1972, had become terrified, was Trafficante's word, had become terrified when he discovered that, Larry O'Brien had been made the new head of the Democratic National Committee and was going to be therefore supervising the 1972 election against Richard Nixon. And Nixon knew immediately that O'Brien had been, for some 20 years prior to becoming the new head of the Democratic National Committee, the Washington lobbyist for Howard Hughes. And as you'll recall, I explained that Nixon had contacted Howard Hughes to get Hughes to set up the assassination team to kill Fidel Castro and Raul Castro and Che Guevara and the others. So there's no way that Santos Trafficante would have told us that, being the first one to take any initiative whatsoever to communicate and reveal the fact that he knew that these were the people that had killed the president. And the fact is that later on enabled me to realize, when we got this photograph of Rip Robertson, and I was told by Dick Billings that Billings had been there when Rip Robertson was coordinating the team that went in to Cuba back in June of 1963 to attempt to assassinate Fidel Castro. That made it clear that that was an assassination operation. Rip Robertson was there at the time commanding that unit, and Pauly made that statement that they were going to kill the president. So there's no way that Trafficante would have revealed all of that to us in May of 1973 if in fact it hadn't been true. So it was a complete admission against his own personal criminal interests involved potentially in one of the most heinous crimes of the entire century. There was absolutely no reason why he would have said that to us. Okay, number 4 is there's no possible way that Lee Harvey Oswald would have just happened to have been in the Texas School Book Depository, immediately overlooking the very spot where President Kennedy was assassinated on November 22nd of 1963, unless that had been arranged pursuant to some type of a plan, given his particular background. And in that particular background, it makes it absolutely clear that he is not and had never been a pro-Castro leftist, as he was portrayed to be. And you go over the details that were concealed about Lee Harvey Oswald, and it becomes obvious that nobody of his particular background would have simply coincidentally happened to be there. in effect, in Dealey Plaza at the time the president came by, because we know that he had been, number one, a very low-level intelligence operative when he was in the United States Marine Corps back between September of 1957 and November of 1958, when he was based at Atsugi Air Base in Japan, where he, in fact, had become, as I mentioned to you before, this low-level intelligence gathering operative against this place called the Queen Bee, which was a bar near the base where the women who worked at the bar were soliciting information from the personnel at the U-2 base, trying to get information about what was going on at the base. And Oswald, as I mentioned to you, reported this to his immediate superior, and he was immediately put in touch with this private civilian from an intelligence organization that basically began to give him money to bring to the Queen Bee, to spread the money around, to engage contact with these women so he could in fact give them false intelligence information, which could then be traced through the intelligence system to find out where it was going. So that we know that that's where he started in that operation, and we know that he was recruited from that operation to be part of a thing called the Illusionary Warfare Project, which was based at Nags Head in South Carolina. And we know this because of two reasons. One is Richard Nagel, who was the man who was giving him the money, said so later and reported it. And he had also been seen there in the Illusionary Warfare training base at Nags Head by a fellow by the name of Tosh Plumley, who was a CIA-trained pilot. And that I knew Victor Marchetti. Victor Marchetti was a longtime CIA operations specialist and intelligence officer, and he explained in some detail to me what the Illusionary Warfare Project was, and it was this whole operation where they were creating what they called dangles, intelligence dangles, where they would have young, usually low-level military people who might have access to some intelligence information. They would train them to give people the public impression that they were sympathetic to leftist causes, hoping that they would be contacted and recruited by Soviet agents, and then they could infiltrate them. And we know that it's just not going to happen that somebody like Oswald is just going to write a letter to the Marine Corps saying, I'd like to be let out of the Marine Corps because my mother had a can of peas fall on her nose and she needs to have me home. That isn't how it happens. And yet he just wrote that one simple letter to the Marine Corps Command and was immediately released from the Marine Corps to go home to, quote, take care of his mother. And he was only home for 3 days before he was on a plane on the way to Russia. Okay, and that we also know that it doesn't happen that you go into Russia, you go into the embassy in Moscow, and you renounce your American citizenship. And 18 months later, you get tired of it and decide you want to come back home. And they immediately say, well, that's okay. You can go right back home, and we'll give you the money to fly or to take the boat. And that's what he did. Okay, and also, it just doesn't happen. And in fact, it didn't happen that he would just coincidentally be met when he arrives at Hoboken, New Jersey at the port of entry by a fellow by the name of Spaz Rakin, who in fact was the secretary of an aggressively anti-communist, extreme right-wing, pro-Nazi organization that was directly related to the anti-Bolshevik bloc of nations. who was the director of whom was Yaroslav Stetsko. And Yaroslav Stetsko, the boss of this guy, Spaz Rakin, was the head of the largest and most important umbrella organization of former Nazi collaborators in the entire world. And this guy was his assistant. And this guy, Stetsko, was an official reporter, full-time reporter to the Foreign Intelligence Digest. Okay? And the Foreign Intelligence Digest was set up by Charles Willoughby, that I told you about, that was the G2 to MacArthur. And it was done in Dallas in 1951. And that H.L. Hunt was one of the co-funders of this, as was William D. Pauley. Okay? And and it turns out, through some investigation that I did, when you're looking for the Foreign Intelligence Digest, former issues of the Foreign Intelligence Digest, it turns out that they're kept at the University of Arkansas in box number 94 of the documents of Reverend Billy James Hargis, who was the extreme right-wing fascist minister in Dallas, who was very close to Edwin Walker, General Edwin Walker, the right-wing fascist military guy who was dismissed from the United States Army by President Kennedy because of his refusal to stop distributing John Birch Society materials to all of the people under his command. And it turns out that the John Birch of the John Birch Society, that John Birch was an intelligence officer who was assigned by General James Doolittle to be an intelligence officer for the Flying Tigers, which was founded by William Pauley, who was the same guy who was the co-founder and co-funder of the Foreign Intelligence Digest with Charles Willoughby and H.L. Hunt. You know, that kind of stuff doesn't just happen in the world. Okay? And it turns out that this Spaz Rakin, when he put Oswald and Marina on the airplane and flew them into Dallas, he was handed off directly to George de Mohrenschildt. George de Mohrenschildt is another right-wing fascist sympathizer who was part of the white Russian community in Dallas that come from Western Russia that were sympathetic to the the Nazis when they invaded Russia, and they're pro-Tsarist royalists. And he's the one that took charge of him and shepherded Oswald all around Dallas. This is not something that is done for a person who is a devout leftist, as they were insisting that Oswald was. And we also have done further investigation and know that Oswald was intimately involved with Guy Bannister in New Orleans and David Ferry. And Guy Bannister was the head of the anti-communist, the World Anti-Communist League in the southern United States, in Latin America. And the World Anti-Communist League is a fascist organization. There's a book that you might want to read, depending on what you're going to be doing your thesis on here. And that is a book called Inside the League. And it was written by the two brothers that were brothers of, not Drew Pearson, but one of the other major, you'll find it's called Inside the League. And it goes into detail about this being a fascist organization around the world. Not just a conservative group, or not just an anti-communist group, but an affirmatively fascist organization. And that in Guy Bannister, whom Oswald worked directly with, was the head of this thing. And in fact, Oswald was identified by the secretary of Guy Bannister as having been directly involved in helping to offload a bunch of weapons that were actually stolen from a particular arsenal in New Orleans, and that they were bringing those weapons to the base at Lake Pontchartrain, which was the anti-Castro Cuban exile, one of the 5 paramilitary bases in southeastern United States, where the S-Force people were divided among those, and so that and there is this really interesting letter that prior to this time no one had been able to quite figure out what the heck it meant. There was a letter that was written by Lee Harvey Oswald to H.L. Hunt, asking Hunt to please clarify for Oswald what Oswald's employment relationship was with H.L. Hunt. And that had never made any sense to anybody, what that thing was all about. But it makes perfect sense when you understand that Lee Harvey Oswald was in fact working for the Foreign Intelligence Digest, and that all of the kind of things that he was doing of going to ACLU meetings and going to meetings of the Fair Play for, or organizing the Fair Play for Cuba organization, that these were all activities that he was engaged in as an operative for the Foreign Intelligence Digest, of attempting to gather information against people that were viewed by the ultra-right wing as subversives. Okay, so that there's absolutely no reason why Richard Billings, who was the Miami bureau chief for Life magazine, would make up a story telling me that he was present when William D. Pauley told John Martino, right standing next to Rip Robertson, that in fact they were going to kill the president. I mean, there's absolutely no reason why he would have ever told anybody that, because it's humiliating to him that he actually was there and heard them say that, and then later realized as soon as the president was killed that these are the people that probably killed him, and that he still hadn't done anything about it. And so he ends up telling me about this only years later, and there's no rational reason why he would do that, because it's contrary to his interests, because it was terribly embarrassing for him. And there's no way that Lee Harvey Oswald, no way that Lee Harvey Oswald was going to be able to fire, and this is a very simple fact. There's no possible way that Lee Harvey Oswald, from the 6th floor window of the Texas School Book Depository, fired 3 shots with a bolt-action Mannlicher Carcano rifle in 6.5 seconds and had 3 hits on one in the back of President Kennedy, one of them that hit a second one, and clearly a second shot that hit John Connally, and a third shot that was the kill shot that killed President Kennedy. There's no possible way that the only way that anybody came close to replicating firing 3 shots from a Mannlicher Carcano rifle was, I told you, by bolting it down and cranking off 3 shots that they fired as fast as they possibly could, which still didn't make it in 6.5 seconds, and they weren't able to aim the rifle at all in order to get those shots off. So there's no way that happened. And ancillarily to that point is there's absolutely no way to support the proposition that Governor Connally was shot by the same bullet that hit President Kennedy, because there are in fact 3 separate frames of the Zapruder film, and I happen to know that because Richard Billings is one of the very few people in the world that ever had direct access to the Zapruder film, the original film, because he and his team are the ones that got the film. And they're the ones that got access to the developed frames, and he's the one that took the frames, the blow-up frames, the big, like 6 by 8 frames of the Zapruder film, and showed them to Governor Connally. And Governor Connally looked at them and said, see, look, I told you, I was not hit by the same bullet. Because as I told you the other day, look, here I am holding my Stetson, And there's President Kennedy in the back seat grabbing his throat, having already been shot through the throat. And I'm now turning around, trying to look into the back seat, and I'm still holding my white Stetson in my right hand. And I turned all the way back to halfway to my left before I was hit. So it's perfectly clear that that was not the same bullet, he said. And he said, I know positively that it wasn't the same bullet. And so that means that there had to have been 3 separate shots. The one that hit the president in the back, there's actually a 4th shot that hit him in the throat, but then the shot that hit Connally, and then the kill shot that killed the president. And so there's no possible way that could have been fired from just one single Mannlicher bolt action rifle, that nobody could do that. Okay, and now a very important fact, one that you have probably almost certainly never heard about at all, is that it didn't just happen that Lee Harvey Oswald, on the night that the night after he'd been arrested, he was arrested on the afternoon of November 22nd. On the evening of November 23rd, at 11 p.m., he asked to have a telephone call made for him from the jail, from the Dallas jail. Does this make it work? Yeah, I think it does. Okay, you see this? This is a collect call request from the jail of the Dallas Police Department, requested by prisoner Lee Harvey Oswald, asking the operator to place a call to Raleigh, North Carolina, to a John Hurt, who is at area code 919-833-1253. And it turns out he's asked her to place the call for him. She reported it to the Secret Service. The Secret Service then said they wanted to monitor any such call if it were made. And the woman, L. Sweeney, her name is, who signed this particular verification that the call had been asked for, that she in fact rumpled up the request for the message and threw it into the wastebasket. And her assistant, let me see, here's her name. Her assistant, let me find here what her name is, just so you'll have it. I guess I didn't write it down here. But anyway, her assistant was sitting here, and she was shocked that this lady Sweeney had not placed the phone call that had been requested. And so when Sweeney went off to do a coffee break, this woman took the note out of the trash basket and kept it, just as a souvenir. Okay, and so that this is, and the fact is that John Hurt, at that number right there, turns out to have been a military intelligence officer. And upon further investigation, it turns out that he was an intelligence officer based at Nags Head, North Carolina, right where the illusionary warfare training base was. So that things like this don't just happen. It isn't just coincidental that Oswald tried to make this call, because he was trying to make a call to someone who was going to be his intelligence contact, so that he could get out of the problem that he was in. And number 9, there is no way that Jack Ruby, who was the Dallas bagman for Sam Giancana, who was instrumental in setting up the S-Force, that Santos Trafficante has confirmed to us were the ones that actually shot the president and killed him. There's no way that, that Sam Giancana's bagman in Dallas just gets upset over the fact that he felt bad for Jackie Kennedy and just happened to go inside the Dallas Police Department and gun down the alleged assassin of President Kennedy right in front of everybody. You know, that he just got a bad feeling for poor Mrs. Kennedy and decided he was going to go in and kill him. And he just happened to be the bag man for Sam Giancana. Okay? And moreover, number 10, there's no way that the kind of steps could have been taken that were verified to have been taken, attempting to fake certain evidence against Lee Harvey Oswald, unless there was some kind of a sophisticated plan underway to try to frame him up as being the one that killed the president. And there are a number of these things. For example, a fellow by the name of what's his name? He's got this really strange name. His name is Layton Martens, L-A-Y-T-O-N, Martens, M-A-R-T-E-N, Layton Martens, a fellow that looks very much like Lee Harvey Oswald, actually appeared at a number of rifle ranges in the Dallas, Texas area, signing in under the name of Lee Harvey Oswald, and actually doing things like being very rowdy and walking in front of people who were trying to fire downrange and interfering with them, and actually shooting at other people's targets, and then introducing himself to them as Lee Harvey Oswald. You know, and there's a very peculiar thing about this, because one of my investigators, William John Stone Taylor, United States Marine Corps CID, Criminal Investigations Officer. No, I take that back. He wasn't an officer. He'd be insulted. He was just a sergeant in the Marine Corps. He was actually assigned shortly after the assassination to move in next door to Layton Martens' brother and to befriend him and try to get introduced to Layton Martens. Now, this came from the Marine Corps command structure instructing him as a criminal investigator to befriend Layton Martens' brother to get to meet Layton Martens, to do surveillance on Layton Martens. He could never understand why that was done until we discovered that Layton Martens was one of the guys who was involved with Lee Harvey Oswald in unloading these stolen weapons in New Orleans that were being stored in Guy Bannister's office and then being brought to Lake Pontchartrain. And so that this fellow Layton Martens is also the guy who was roommates with David Ferrie in New Orleans. And David Ferrie was the Civil Air Patrol boss of Lee Harvey Oswald in the Civil Air Patrol. And yet Layton Martens is going around pretending he's Lee Harvey Oswald, firing a Mannlicher Carcano rifle at these rifle ranges, this old, weird, foreign bolt-action military weapon that was actually called the humanitarian weapon because it couldn't kill anybody. It was so inaccurate. And it was issued by the Italian military. And also, there was a completely fake report of Lee Harvey Oswald having gone to the Russian embassy in Mexico City and trying to get a visa to go to Cuba. And in fact, the Mexico CIA station was insisting that this was true, that it had been done shortly before the assassination. And it turns out that on further investigation, when in fact the video footage, the camera footage for the U.S. Embassy actually got a photograph of the person who had come in to apply as Lee Harvey Oswald for the visa, it was absolutely clear that it was not Lee Harvey Oswald. I mean, it isn't even close. He was short and squat and bald-headed and big muscular dude, and it was not Oswald at all. And Everybody, once the photograph was shown to them, acknowledged that it wasn't he. And yet the Mexico station of the CIA was insisting that Lee Harvey Oswald had gone in and applied for a visa to go to Cuba. And then there was a fake telephone call that was placed, allegedly by Lee Harvey Oswald, to the Mexican embassy, or an embassy in Mexico. Again, and they ended up doing a voice print on it. And the person said they were Lee Harvey Oswald, and they were inquiring about how to get a visa to go to Cuba. And a voice print test was done on it, and it was positively proved that it was false, and it wasn't he. And so what is happening here? You know, why is it that people are, this Leighton Martens is showing up at these rifle ranges pretending to be Lee Harvey Oswald, firing a Mannlicher Carcano rifle? And why is it that people are falsely pretending that they're Lee Harvey Oswald, going to the U.S. Embassy in Mexico City to try to get a visa to Cuba? There's, in addition to that, these are just some of the big ones, is there's no way in the world that Richard Nagel, a member of the Field Operations Intelligence that was created by Charles Willoughby immediately after they created the Foreign Intelligence Digest out of Dallas. They organized a separate organization called the Field Operations Intelligence, of which Nagel was a part. There was no way that he, in September of 1963, this is 2 months before the assassination at the end of November, that he appears in a bank in El Paso and fires 2 shots into the ceiling of the bank, and then sits in his car waiting for the police to come and arrest him, and then tells them that they should look in the trunk of his car so that they can find these false IDs, photograph IDs of Lee Harvey Oswald under the name of A. Hidell. And in fact find fake IDs with Nagel's photograph on them in the name of Lee Harvey Oswald, and fake ID of Nagel, photo ID in the name of A. Hidell, right? And this is 2 months prior to the assassination. And when he's taken into custody by the police, he says to them, which is official record of the El Paso Police Department, saying, "I'd rather be here, arrested here and in jail, than in Dallas in November." Okay? So what I'm saying, there's just no way that can happen if there isn't some major sophisticated plan underway to attempt to direct evidence toward Lee Harvey Oswald as allegedly being the purchaser of the Carcano rifle that had been purchased through the mail by an A. Hidell. And there's also no reason for George de Mohrenschildt, who had been, as I mentioned to you, the white Russian fascist guy who was basically shepherding Oswald all around in Dallas. There was no reason for him, when he was approached, his daughter's house where he was visiting was approached by Gaetan Fonzi, one of the investigators for the House Select Committee on Assassinations. There was no reason why George de Mohrenschildt should have gone out into the garage and put a shotgun in his mouth and blown his brains out to avoid being questioned by the people from the House Select Committee on Assassinations, if in fact his relationship with Oswald was completely innocent. And there also would be no way that George de Mohrenschildt would have just innocently taken Lee Harvey Oswald to Collins Radio to try to get him a job at the Collins Radio Corporation, which in fact was the lessee of the Rex. In the first week of November, that was attempting to put anti-Castro Cuban exiles ashore in Cuba. In that the Rex is the same ship, CIA ship, that proven the CIA paid the dock fees for the USS Rex, okay? and that was seen by Richard Billings refueling the Flying Tiger on the night of June 19th of 1963, 5 months earlier, off Cuba. Okay, so there's no reason why any of these things would have happened, nor would there have been any reason for George de Mohrenschildt to write a letter to George H.W. Bush imploring Bush to intervene to keep de Mohrenschildt from being interrogated by the members of the House Select Committee on Assassinations, if in fact his relationship had been innocent. And there's no way that Lyndon Baines Johnson just happened to appoint Allen Dulles to be on the Warren Commission to investigate the killing of the president, in light of the fact that Dulles had been fired by John Kennedy in the fall of 1961 following the Cuban the debacle at the Bay of Pigs. There's no reason that he would have appointed him to be an objective investigator of the death of him, nor can I get a glass of water? I forgot to bring any water here. That there's no way that Lyndon Johnson would have just coincidentally attempted to persuade Earl Warren to become the head of the commission that became known as the Warren Commission, the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, telling him that I absolutely need to have you be the head of this commission because it's essential that someone be there that can conceal the fact that there was an assassination team that had been organized to assassinate Fidel Castro, and that it was created by Bobby Kennedy and John Kennedy, which is completely false because we know the details of it having been created by Richard Nixon back in June and July of 1960. There's no way that Lyndon Johnson could have even known about such an assassination team. Okay? And to specifically ask Earl Warren to take over as the head of that commission and specifically conceal the existence of this assassination team under the fabrication that it would have been discovered that it was the Kennedy brothers that created it. And if it were discovered that such an assassination team had been fielded by the Kennedys to kill Fidel Castro, that people would assume that Fidel Castro had found out about this and that therefore he had assassinated President Kennedy first, and therefore the United States would have to militarily invade the island of Cuba and Russia would go to war with us in a World War III. Now, there's no way that Lyndon Johnson just makes up a story like that, okay? Unless there is some much more sophisticated plan afoot. And what it appears to me to be is that clearly Lee Harvey Oswald was a part of this group. He was a part of that community, of those right-wing fascist elements that included H.L. Hunt and George de Mohrenschildt and William Pauley and H.L. Hunt and what's his head, the Willoughby. That whole crowd that were fascists, and Bill Harvey, who had been the SIS, the Special Intelligence Services for the FBI down in the Mexico City station down there, and it turns out that there was a woman in Mexico City that the Mexico City CIA station tried to coerce into saying that she had met Lee Harvey Oswald, thank you, when he was down in Mexico City trying to get a visa to go to Cuba. And in fact, she was tortured to try to get her to say that, and she was tortured by Nasser Haro, the head of the DFS, whom I told you was the man who brought Joseph Burkholder Smith down to Argentina and brought him to the little town of Salta and brought him into the meeting where the Nazis were sitting at the table under a swastika flag, you know, and that's Nasser Haro. And Nasser Haro is the guy that tortured this woman to try to get her to falsely testify that Oswald had been in Mexico City and was her lover and was trying to get a visa to go to Cuba, all of which is factually false. Okay? So that what it appears is that while Lee Harvey Oswald was involved with all of those people, that in fact he was being set up. He was being set up to take the fall for this. But I've gotten in trouble with a number of the researchers in this area when I say that I think that there's reason to believe that Lee Harvey Oswald realized that there was going to be some kind of a false attack against Kennedy, that there was going to be a false assassination attempt against him, and that they were going to try to blame it on Fidel Castro in Cuba, and that he was sympathetic to such an endeavor, and that these kind of endeavors go on all the time in that particular milieu of those people, and that he may well have been knowledgeable that there was going to be a staged assassination, a mock assassination attack against him that could be used to instigate an attack against the island of Cuba, and that he found himself in the midst of it. And when, much to his surprise, that Kennedy was actually assassinated by this very group that he was part of, and he discovered that he was being set up for this.